What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Enjoying the Review. I'm your host, Incomparable Zach Jones, and today I'm going to be reviewing and recapping Severance Season 2, Episode 4, entitled Woes Hollow. Before I get into things, guys, please, if you will, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Leave thumbs up, positive reviews, all that good stuff. If you like, you can subscribe in audio form on your podcast catcher of choice. And if you like, you can follow me on social media on Twitter or Blue Sky at Zach Jones Live. That's ZachJonesLive. All right, guys, let's get into the episode. So this episode was, I was going to say about a bit of a weird one, but let's be honest, most Severance episodes are a bit of a weird one. But this one in particular, first of all, I'll say, I think just by a scotch, this might be my least favorite episode of this season thus far. That being said, I still really liked it. I think I'm still going to give it like a 7.5 out of 10. It's still very good. There's just a few things in it that puzzled me a bit from a storytelling perspective. But depending on how they handle those things in the next episodes, I could actually see myself in retrospect, liking this episode even more, maybe thinking of it more highly. I think the only way I can explain myself, though, is to go into spoilers immediately. So, spoilers ahoy. So the big story development in this episode is that Irving, he's a smart guy, and he figures out just what we've all suspected, that Helly is actually Helena, Helly's outie pretending to be the innie. And this did surprise me. It definitely defied expectations, because I think myself, and I'm guessing a lot of you guys, would have thought they would have drew, that out much longer before the reveal. And the thing that puzzles me, and from a storytelling perspective, is if you think about it, like, what, her as a mole, how much did she actually uncover before she was revealed? I mean, I guess the biggest thing is they now for sure know that Marc, knows that Gemma is still alive. That's kind of the biggest piece of intel they would have learned. But I don't know, I would have almost thought she would have discovered more of that, maybe something more about the other characters as well. And maybe we'll find out that she did, and they're just not playing like the full, everything here. But yeah, that did surprise me, and made me wonder if, like, because I found that aspect interesting of, like, her being a mole and them not knowing, and gives us little things to look for. And but it is interesting. And the other thing that I didn't love, and a lot of shows do this, is they'll have kind of a big cliffhanger, and then the next episode after that will be kind of a cool down episode, almost, where they don't really explore the ramifications of the cliffhanger, and then they make you wait another episode. And what I mean by that is, so the big thing at the end of last episode was Marc being reintegrated, and we do get a slight peek at this episode. So I'm not going to say they totally don't explore it in this episode, but for the most part, they kind of steer clear of it. And I mean, that's the thing I was kind of most interested in going into this episode, is, finally exploring that more. Let's hit up on that, though. So, he ends up in this episode hooking up with Helena, although he thinks it's Helly. And I do find it interesting because he's basically two minds in the same body. One of him is in love with Helly. The other one is in love with Gemma. And, I think we just kind of figured, in that war, like, the Audi side of him would almost win, the side in love with Gemma. But we see in this episode that's not necessarily true. Um, and so I think that development's interesting. Him having this conflict inside of him where he's literally in love with two different women. But then you got the complication of, this weird love triangle possibly where like now I assume Helly's probably going to figure out that Marc hooked up with Helena, thinking it was her. One thing I hope they don't do is like a weird like pregnancy storyline where like Helena gets pregnant and then like Helly for 9 months experiences pregnancy knowing that she'll probably never see the child. That would be a weird storyline. But I guess the other thing, one of my thoughts when we found out, are largely suspected, that Helena was posing as Helly, was I thought, maybe during the course of the season, her personality would shift a lot, just being around Marc and the others. And like, almost maybe she would have a slight redemption angle. Doesn't seem like that's the way they're going. But I would have found that interesting. But you know what? It's still interesting either way. I'm definitely, want to see what they do next. But yeah, those are the things that left me a little puzzled. And then in this episode, as I'll get in the recap, a lot more weirdness with the whole Kier Egan business that honestly, I don't know what to make. I can't really make heads or tails of some of that stuff and what they're going for exactly. Also, I will say, like, there is a level of kind of abstraction with Severance. This episode, in a certain spots, especially with like the Irving dream sequence spot, was maybe even a little more abstract than I would have liked in this show. But I don't know. I gotta think about that a little more. And like, I feel like an idiot sometimes when it comes to symbolism in films and TV, because sometimes I'll hear someone else do a review of something and they'll immediately like pick up on like, oh, this symbolizes that, and sometimes I'll be like, oh yeah, I should have picked up on it, but other times I'll be like, oh, you just brought something in there that wasn't in there to make yourself like this more. So I don't know. Sometimes symbolism can be tricky, I think, in movies and television. But guys, let's get into the recap. So the episode begins. We hear the famous elevator ding. Irving wakes up and he finds himself in the middle of a frozen lake. This seems a little weird to me. So, we find out in a bit from Milchick that the Audis agreed. They gave permission. So it seems like they came out into this forest region and then got hit and changed into their innie. But why would someone like Irving, like, even if he agreed to it, it's weird that they'd be like, can you go stand in the middle of this frozen lake with thin ice before we change you into your innie self? And he's just like, yeah, okay, that sounds like a plan. I want to see the lead up to this episode, and how that worked exactly. Because isn't that what would have had to have happened? Maybe I'm missing something, but it seems like that would have been the sequence of events. So it just seems weird to me that Audi Irving would have agreed to that. It seems weird. But nonetheless, the elevator ding. Irving, he's in the middle of the frozen lake, and then suddenly Marc appears on top of this cliff next to the lake, and he tells Irving, "Hey, there's a path up here, so come join me." So Irving carefully walks across the lake, and I think he just mentioned that the ice is thin in spots. And then he starts walking up the hillside, the cliffside, and he runs into Helena, who says she says she doesn't know how she got there. Obviously she's lying. She knows exactly how she got there. So they make it up to the top of the cliff and join Marc. Marc says he woke up on the ice, and Helena says she woke up on the cliff. That's also weird. I mean, I guess they would have woken up at different times because they stutter, or their entrances, I guess, still. See, but that's also weird because that means if Marc woke up on the same patch of ice that Irving did, maybe he didn't, but if he did, they were moving Audi Irving into like the same general vicinity as like Marc would have been making his way up the cliffside or whatever. It just, I don't know. It seems implausible, but maybe I'm overanalyzing. Also a little conveniently, but Dylan also appears on the cliff, even though like they were all shouting between each other and he didn't pipe up at all, before. So all of a sudden, they hear the Kier anthem playing, and this leads them to a TV, which somehow has electricity hooked to. When this was all happening, a part of me was like, well, maybe somehow this is all like some sort of virtual reality simulation type thing, and maybe we'll find out that that's the case. But I don't know. It doesn't seem like it. What do you guys think? For a second I thought maybe that was a possibility, but then it's like, I don't know. It seems a little far-fetched then with all the other stuff that happens in this episode. So I don't think that's the case. So I guess they ran a very long power cable to this TV, I guess. So they play the video on the TV, and it's a video from Mr. Milchick, which is also like cut really weird. It has like very abrupt cuts and things in it. He welcomes them to their first outdoor retreat team building occurrence, or ORTBO for short. And he says for 2 days, they will get to explore the Dieter-Egan National Forest. And, Dylan's like, who the hell is Dieter-Egan? Apparently he's not in the perpetuity wing, or they would have heard of him. And Mr. Milchick, replies almost as if it's like live, and he's like responding directly to Dylan. He's like, I bet you're wondering about Dieter-Egan. And he says they can find out more answers in the 4th appendix, which Kier-Egan dictated in his final hours of life, a text of such sanctity that it is forbidden upon the severed floor. Which is also a little weird because, like, once we find out like some of the stuff in this book, I mean, it's like it doesn't seem like it would adversely affect them any more than the other weird Kier-Egan texts that were kind of outlined in the first season. So he says that the appendix is waiting for them in Scissor Cave, a cave frequented by the lesbian community. The very same grotto where Kier Egan, uh, I think, formed the Four Tempers, or I, I wish I would have wrote these down. I briefly saw them in the recap where they were like, um, they're like, one of them is woe. I remember one of them is like frolic, and there's like these like vague emotions. I mean, I think a popular fan theory, which is probably right, is that when they're taking the numbers on the computer and dropping them into the different buckets, they're probably like correspond to these different tempers, and possibly what they're doing is altering someone's personality. And like, I know one of the leading fan theories is that like they figure like the reason they need Marc to do the Cold Harbor project, which is related to Gemma, is because like they maybe found that like it only works if somebody knows the person, or has a relationship with the person, that sort of thing. Although if that theory is true, it does make you wonder, like, who did they assign Helly to do that with? You figure, maybe an Egan of some sort. And maybe they're not letting her in on, Helena in on everything either. You never know. So he warns them not to stray from Kier's path, lest you roil nature's wrath. He tells them that there will be help along the way. And so in the distance, they see a man who looks like Marc pointing them in a direction. And this is another thing, they're going to find other people that look like them, pointing them in multiple directions. And a part of me also wonders about, this was another very abstract portion of this episode. I don't know exactly, like, they'll say in a bit, like, symbolically what these people mean. But, like, are these, like, other, like, they show them from somewhat of a distance, and they're, like, a bit not in focus. So, like, are these other people that do like semi resemble them or dressed up to resemble them, or is there maybe something supernatural or artificial going on? It's unclear. So they walk for a long time until they finally run into someone who looks like Helena. Also, I always forget if it's Helena or Helena, but one of those. And this, she points them in another direction towards the cave. So inside the cave, they find the fourth appendix. And the book is dedicated to Dieter Egan. So the book reveals that Kier had a twin brother, and that twin brother is indeed Dieter. I forget the whole details of the story, but it's like they kind of grew into a little older into adolescence, and like I think Dieter wanted to be, I don't know if like a logger or something along those lines, something to do with like wood cutting or something, I think, and he kind of got Kier to go along with him. But anyway, it says that they went to a place called Woe's Hollow. And it has kind of a map in the book, and it has a waterfall. And so Irving figures that they are meant to walk in the brothers' footsteps. So we get another walking montage. But this time as they're walking, Irving is reading the book. And eventually they run into another doppelganger, this time that looks like Dylan, who points them towards the direction of the hollow. So they take a bit of a break, and Irving sees Marc and Helena talking to each other, and he seems suspicious of them. So in the next scene, he gets Marc alone, and he tells Marc that he does not trust Helena and her story of what her Audi saw with the whole night gardener thing, And, Marc, defends Helly, and, Irving basically tells him, I don't think you have an objective perspective because of your feelings towards her. They walk a little longer, and they come upon what looks like a dead frozen seal. Again, which is also an odd choice. And Irving suggests that maybe they should eat the seal because he's like, we're hungry. We don't know when we're going to find something to eat. Maybe we should just eat this seal. This leads to Irving kind of bickering with the group. And Marc's like, Irving, I know you had a bad experience with your Audi, but, there's no call for this kind of stuff or whatever. And this causes Irving to get mad at Dylan because obviously, Dylan's the one he told about his Audi experience. So he figures that Dylan dropped the dime on him. And Dylan is says that he didn't. Obviously it seems like Helena probably did. So they find the waterfall, and at the top of the waterfall, there's now a doppelganger of all four of them. Suddenly, Mr. Milchick shows up, and he starts talking to them. And he tells them, since Kier had a twin, they provided a twin for all of them. And I forgot to mention, Dylan kind of sensed that earlier when he first saw the couple too. He's like, oh, it's like we have a twin. And then when Milchick says this, he's like, I told you. So Milchick tells them, this is like a small waterfall, but he tells them it's the tallest waterfall on Earth. And, because they've never seen a waterfall, they believe him because, for all they know, it's true. So Milchick brings them to a camp that has 4 tents and a campfire. Miss Wong is cooking them food. He's like, oh, we imported some very delicious meats for you guys. Okay, this I found curious. Milchick gives Marc a torch, which he says can be used as a light and a heat source. Double duty, as he hands it to Marc. And I'm like, is that supposed to be an implication for us that, oh, maybe he knows or suspects something about reintegration? I wouldn't think so, because that wouldn't make sense to me, really. And of course, I guess they could be monitoring the doctor that does the reintegration. It would be weird to find out that they purposely I mean, I guess that would be an interesting twist if we found out that they hired the doctor back or something like that and purposely had her reintegrate Marc. I don't know what the purpose of that would be, so I doubt that's the case, but maybe that would be an interesting twist. So Helena goes into Irving's tent and tries to kind of make good with him. She makes him a seal out of snow. And he basically says, yeah, I'm kind of embarrassed that I was that paranoid that I suggested that. But then he's like, what did you really see on the outside? He's definitely convinced that she was lying, and so he presses her some more. So this angers her some, and she refuses to tell him, and she leaves the tent. So later, they all join around the campfire. Miss Wong plays the theremin while Milchick reads from the appendix. And so he tells this bizarre story where basically Dieter Egan masturbated, and then he started to basically melt. Like his eye came out of the socket. His hair started falling out. All this weird stuff, and he just has this gruesome death. And then shortly after that, Kier Egan meets I think he says, a gaunt, short woman dressed as a bride. And the woman tells him that he caused this, and now Dieter is no one's brother and only Chaos's whore. Again, I don't know what to make of this story. Very bizarre. Irving asks Milchick if his brother really died that way, and he says the book only tells truth. There is definitely like an exploration of, and I think critique of religion, definitely with the whole Kirigan thing. But it makes me wonder, like, Milchick specifically, do you think he actually is a true believer? Because, like, I definitely got the sense in the last episode where he got the weird, like, black version of the Kirigan paintings, that he's also skeptical of the whole thing, maybe. But obviously the way he acts otherwise makes you think that, no, he's like the truest of believers. But if he is, I think his gift from last episode definitely would have like shaken his faith a bit. So I do wonder where they're going with Milchick, because I have to imagine at some point, like, Cobell is going to come back into power, which makes me think like Milchick is going to do something that upsets the board. But I don't know. It's interesting. So Helena begins to laugh at the notion of this whole weird story. And this makes Milchick very upset. Because also Marc starts laughing too. And so he gets mad and he orders Miss Wong to destroy the marshmallows, which of course upsets Dylan. And Milchick tells Dylan that marshmallows are for team players. So Milchick gets up and leaves. And Irving also gets upset at the others for laughing, tells them it's not funny. And he tells Marc to stop making goo-goo eyes at Helena. And then Irving once again presses Helena about her story about the night gardener, telling her, that she's lying, and he wants to know what really happened. And so Marc and Dylan are kind of like defend Helena, and they're like, man, Irving, you need to like back off. And then so Helena, I forget exactly what she says here, but she basically says Irving's just upset because he can't be with Bert anymore. And, kind of turns the screws on him that way. So Irving gets up, tells them to F off, and he goes, walks away. Okay, so later on, Marc goes to Helena's tent to cheer her up. And he ends up really cheering her up because they end up making the love. Now, first of all, this seems like a pretty risque thing to do, because like there's probably like from the campfire, there's probably like shadows cast on the tent. Like if somebody was watching, they probably could have seen everything. And plus they'd have to be pretty quiet for the others, nobody else to hear them. It seemed like a risky business, but they went for it. So Irving, he goes for a walk from the camp, and he's looking for Mr. Milchick and Miss Wong. But he ends up tripping and falling, and his torch goes out. And then he kind of ends up sitting next to a rock and falling asleep. Helena ends up telling Marc that she did lie about what she saw on the outside. But he tells her that he doesn't care who she is on the outside, but who she is with him on the inside. And then this is where we get a taste of the reintegration, where he briefly like sees her face kind of transform into Gemma because of the reintegration process. Okay, so this is where things get very abstract. So Irving wakes up and he finds a kind of replica of their cubicle in the middle of the forest. And he sits down at the computer, and it appears that Britt, so like a hand shows up, it pulls the cubicle divider down, and it's Britt sitting there. So this kind of makes him happy. But then he looks to the like kitty corner cubicle, and he sees the woman that was in the Kier Egan story from before, the short, demon bride woman. And so then all of a sudden the numbers on his computer begin to move. And I didn't like do any freeze frames here or anything, so I'm not sure if there was maybe like a message somewhere in this whole jumble in numbers and stuff. But this causes him to wake up, and so it appears that this was all just a nightmare and like a fever dream and not real, which I kind of hope is the case. I was definitely like, when he found the computer cubicle, I was like, wow, are they really going like this way with it? So I was almost relieved when it, again, seems like it was a nightmare. Again, at the end of the day, I hope they don't take a real supernatural route with this show, but they might. So Marc wakes up to find Helena missing, and then Dylan informs him that Irving is also missing. So Helena goes to the waterfall, and then Irving shows up behind her. He tells Helena that what she said to him the night before was cruel, and that Helly was never cruel. So he wants to know who she is. And he's like, who would be powerful enough to be able to pose as their own innie? So he grabs Helena, and he starts yelling, and she starts yelling for help, which alerts the others to come to their position. So Irving yells at Milchick to turn her back and tells the others that she's an outie, and he starts dunking her head in the water. So he totally knows. So Irving puts it together that she must be an Egan. Because who else would have the power to do what she's doing? And so Helena yells at Milchick to do it, to turn her back. But she calls him Seth, which in turn outs herself even more that she is indeed Helena. And Irving even picks up on that. He's like, yes, Seth, do it, So Milchick gets on his radio and tells them to remove the Glasgow block. And when that happens, Helena turns back into Helly. So Milchick, this is the other big thing that happens in this episode. Milchick fires Irving, and Dylan apologizes to Irving for not listening to him. And then Irving and Milchick have this tense stare down. And Milchick tells Irving that all of his records will be destroyed, and it'll be as though he never existed. The episode ends with Milchick getting on his radio and ordering them to, he tells Irving to walk into the forest first. And then he gets on his radio and has them, basically ding the elevator, undo Irving, and turn him back into his outie self. And I noticed that as he's turning, and that's how the episode ends, is kind of that weird, like, fade they do when people are transforming. And you kind of see the look on Irving's face, and he kind of looks satisfied. He kind of looks contented. One thing I missed is before he goes, Irving tells Dylan to hang in there. And so I don't know exactly like what that's a code to do. I don't think Dylan knows at this point, but it definitely seems like he's set up something for Dylan to find. Um, giving him that phrase. So that's also a little breadcrumb mystery going forward. So yeah, so this also makes you wonder, like, what's the rest of Irving's storyline this season? Because we definitely know that Audi Irving knows something with the whole mystery of him getting on the payphone and telling somebody on the other end about his innie. We know that Audi Irving knows. He it seems like he's doing an investigation of Lumen to a certain degree. We just don't know yet. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out. But yeah, I was definitely surprised that they, outed Helena this early. That's definitely a interesting development. But now it makes me wonder if this is going to make them suspicious of each other going forward. Like, oh, maybe someone else is a mole. That sort of thing. Who knows? But yeah, definitely interested to. I mean, again, another banger episode. Even though, like I said, it's probably was my least favorite episode of this season so far. Still, primo television. Great stuff. Severance team. It's highly recommend this show to anybody. But guys, what do you think? Do you have any theories of things that are happening that I'm too stupid to recognize and pick up on, which isn't saying much. But guys, I think that's another episode. So if you will, like I said, please subscribe to the channel. Share the clips, tell your friends about the channel. But thumbs up, positive reviews, those help me out in the algorithm. And also, again, if you prefer audio, you can listen in audio form on your podcast catcher of choice. And you can follow me on social media on Twitter and Blue Sky at Zach Jones Live, ZachJonesLive. But guys, until next time, I hope you're enjoying the review. Bye, guys.